also like to extend my thanks to Professor Arun Gautamji for really making it possible for me to come. I was about to leave from Vancouver itself and really mobilized because this is the end semester. I have to really go and teach and take my end sem exam. But he prevailed that no, this is also a work you have to do. So thank you for making this possible. I thank, of course, the departments for organizing. And so I believe that most of you sitting here in this room must be knowing about Baba Saheb Ambedkar, one or the other fact. More so at this juncture, in this age of information revolution and the presence of vibrant Indian diaspora and Dalit diaspora in Canada, you must be having deep understanding of Baba Saheb Ambedkar, and that was quite visible in the presentations of references as well. Furthermore, after installation of Baba Saheb bust in the library, I think there have been many lectures and students might have been also exposed to his ideas. Then why at this juncture I have given this topic, Decoding Baba Saheb Ambedkar's idea of modernity and nation. Now there are two very important reasons because of which I have tried to title this lecture as it is. The first reason is the perspective of my lecture and what perspective I'm going to deliver. The second reason is, of course, the understanding the process of reductionism as well as blackout which Baba Saheb Ambedkar has and his ideas have faced in the Indian society by the mainstream Indian media, intelligentsia and academia. And that's why I thought that it is right time to decode Baba Saheb Ambedkar's larger idea of nation, modernity and nation building. So let us first see the perspective. What is the perspective and why I call it as? It is a perspective from below. Now, there may be number of ways in which Baba Saheb Ambedkar has been written and also he has been analyzed. But I call it as perspective from below. And this perspective of below is a perspective in which knowledge is produced by the people who have their consciousness shaped by their unique structural location in the Indian society. And this structural location is unique because it is due to these structural location, they suffer cumulative and collective exclusion. Now just to demonstrate this, this is the Indian social structure which can easily be put, though there may be many more complications, but this is the way it is represented in sociological parlance. This is the Varna hierarchy, Brahman, Kshatri, Vaishya and Shudras, and then last comes the untouchable. Now, if you take this aspect that people here, they have accumulation of cultural capital, and it is here that people who are located here, they suffer from exclusion of cultural capital. And out of this cultural capital, lack of cultural capital, exclusion, production of knowledge takes place. So the basis of this actually, subject or the perspective is that the location of a researcher in the social structure has a bearing on the construction of consciousness. And out of that construction of consciousness, production takes place. So the location of researcher is very important in the social structure. I have tried to establish this proposition from three very important social scientists, sociologists. One is C. Wright Mills, second P. Bourdieu, and third Peter Berger. C. Wright Mill argues that biography, history, and their interaction in society are the three important coordinates which really give us sociological imagination. And I think with that sociological imagination, knowledge is produced. Bourdieu talks about and highlights social and cultural capital leading life chances out of which individuals' construction is made, and out of this production of knowledge takes. Peter Berger talks about with Lucas his very important and seminal work that reality is socially constructed. Now, clubbing these three propositions, how biography of Dalits without any mainstream social and cultural capital, the history has shaped the consciousness of thousands and millions of people, and out of that knowledge production take place. And you can call it as standpoint theory as well, and I stand before you from that particular perspective, and therefore this lecture is actually unique. Having given you the perspective, when I look at Babasaheb Ambedkar, the issue of reductionism and blackout of Babasaheb Ambedkar, what exactly I mean from this proposition is that, according to these propositions, reductionism and blackout, I mean to say that how Babasaheb Ambedkar has been reduced, viewed and reviewed only as a Dalit leader. Dalit leader, the fifth varna in the social hierarchy, or how he has been only reduced as a Mahar leader. I will give you a few examples to prove my point. The first, and for example, I think if you see the writings that how this reductionism takes place, this example I've taken from the literary work, and literary work, if you take the Mulkraj Anand's work, Untouchable, and in Untouchable, Gandhi's imposition and Gandhi's influence for the emancipation of Dalits, or Gandhi is the real emancipator of the Dalits. This is basically shown in the literary novel. The second event, if I see this reductionism, I see even in social scientists, a historian called Eleanor Zelian's PhD work. Even she has gone, did a field work, but when she produces a PhD thesis with the title Ambedkar, the Mahar movement. So he even further reduces to a caste. Now, if that is the case, the history, the literary, what about the journalists? What have they done? And one of the most glaring example comes from Arun Shoury's work, and that is worshipping the false god. And he tries to argue that Babasaheb Ambedkar is not even a constitution maker. And he was only a draftsman. This is the language he uses. Now, if this is the process of reductionism, what about process of blackout? Let us take a few more examples to prove the point. This time, I take a very seminal film, or epic, or historical film, produced by none other than Richard Attenborough, and the name is Gandhi. Richard Attenborough, of course, produced Gandhi on a massive scale with 200,000 say budget, and in that, if you really watch the whole film, not even one frame Ambedkar appears. There is total blackout of Ambedkar. Though it is a proven fact that without Ambedkar, especially after 1929, 28 and 29, Gandhi would not have been Gandhi, because it was Ambedkar's interaction with Gandhi, or his verbal duel with Gandhi, gave him the agenda of untouchability. Otherwise, before that, Gandhi was not at all concerned with untouchability. Later on, but when we see Jabbar Patel's Ambedkar, in which Gandhi appears everywhere, every moment. Now, if Gandhi is not, if Ambedkar is not relevant in the film of Gandhi, then how Gandhi is relevant in Ambedkar's film? So this question is basically that how to evaluate Ambedkar, how to understand Ambedkar independently without any reference to the other towering personalities. Now, if this is the example of blackout, let us also, I've given you the novel, but the 2014 work of Arundhati Roy's introduction to Baba Saheb Ambedkar's Annihilation of Caste. Now, Annihilation of Caste is an essay by Baba Saheb Ambedkar whose introduction is much larger by Arundhati Roy, and in which she tries to argue that, look, I want to popularize annihilation of caste, Baba Saheb Ambedkar's writing. So there is a need that you don't refer to the real works of Baba Saheb Ambedkar, and this whole reductionism to Baba Saheb Ambedkar again to caste. So that is, the two very dominant tendencies in Indian academia, media, and intelligentsia. On the one hand, there is a reductionist process, and on the other hand, there is blackout process. And therefore, I thought that it is time that decoding Baba Saheb Ambedkar's process is very, very important. Now, if these are the examples to prove the point that there is general pattern of reductionism and blackout of Baba Saheb Ambedkar, are there any other processes by which we can really prove the point that there is this process of reductionism and blackout? I argue that yes, there are at least 4 reasons, and because of that, I call this whole academic exercise or understanding Baba Saheb Ambedkar has been a process of, Baba Saheb has been victim of reductionism and blackout. These 4 processes are. Just let us evaluate how or the way Baba Saheb Ambedkar followers have tried to analyze Baba Saheb's personality. The followers, the empirical data from the grassroots, how they revere Baba Saheb Ambedkar, what is the vocabulary they use. Second, the way he has been appreciated by foreign authors. To give some examples, I'll quote that also. The Western social scientists, and last but not the least, the types, the epistemology and perspective of his thought. If we take these 4 aspects and try to understand Baba Saheb Ambedkar, we will see that the process of reductionism and blackout is writ large. So just briefly look at how the followers of Baba Saheb Ambedkar revere him. What is the nomenclature they use to call Baba Saheb Ambedkar? Nowadays, he is called as Bodhisattva, Bharat Ratna, Baba Saheb Dr. Bhimrao Ambedkar. That means, his religious achievements, his the civil achievement for the conferment of the highest civilian award as Bharat Ratna, and then his academic qualification, and of course the whole reverence of his followers, all is clubbed together in the way Baba Saheb Ambedkar is referred in hustings, in meetings, in seminars and conferences. So, but the academic world doesn't see this. They only talk about Baba Saheb Ambedkar as Messiah of the Dalit leaders, or he is talking about caste. They don't see that, no, he is a Bodhisattva also. He is also the Bharat Ratna. He is also a doctorate, a PhD. I think this whole totality has to be brought in if we want to really understand Baba Sahib Ambedkar. Now, it is, if this is the informal way, if this is the way Baba Sahib Ambedkar is revered, let us see how in the formal way Baba Sahib Ambedkar has been analyzed and how he has actually different types of qualities have been highlighted. I take his letter, that felicitation letter of LLD, and the type of qualities, and 65 years back in the institution like Columbia University, the let us see the words which they use, and as you have just said that how much labor he has put in and how many courses he did. But after say 30 years after that, 5th of June 1952, when Ambedkar was awarded a honorary LLD degree, what were the words which were used by the university? And I quote, Bhimrao Ramji Ambedkar, LLD, for 3 years a graduate student in this university, receiving the doctorate in political science, subsequently a student of Inns of Court of University of London, obtaining a doctorate in economics. For the past 3 decades, a barrister, university professor, as a framer of the constitution, of one of the leading citizens of India, a great social reformer, and a vibrant upholder of human rights. None of these qualities get reflected in the writings of the mainstream academia. Rather, it is only caste, as if that nothing beyond caste exists in his writings. And that's why I call it that this is another process of such process of reductionism. So even after 65 years, no university has tried to analyze Baba Sahib Ambedkar. Let us see the Westerner social scientists, how have they tried to look into? And this is very recent works which are coming up. Cosimo Zene of SOAS has edited a volume. Cosimo Zene has edited a volume where he compares Baba Sahib Ambedkar with Antonio Gramsci. And of course, there are 14 scholars which have contributed in that edited volume. I'm not going in detail about that, but just to give you that how his larger ideas are being now equated at the international level, but still no hope at the national level. Now, the second, especially the second reference which I want to quote is Perry Anderson's Indian Ideology. And Anderson has tried to look at least 2 aspects of Baba Sahib Ambedkar. One, his academic achievement again, and here he tries to compare Gandhi, Nehru and Ambedkar. And then he has also tried to evaluate his political vision, that how visionary Baba Sahib Ambedkar was. Now, just to quote him, Gandhi did not claim much book learning. Nehru, on the other hand, enjoyed higher education. Gandhi lacked. I'm talking about Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi because there are many Gandhis now in India. So I'm talking about Mohandas. So Gandhi lacked. It would be unfair to compare Nehru to Ambedkar. Intellectually, head and shoulder above most of the Congress leaders, in part due to far more serious training at LSE and Columbia to read whom is to enter in a different world. Anderson, unquote. Now, if that is what Anderson has to say about his academic credentials, let us see what he has to say about his political vision, the foresightedness. According to Anderson, when Gandhi, Nehru, Patel, and the whole Congress and even Muslim League had no clue about the outcome of India's struggle for independence, Ambedkar alone had a solution, of the Hindu-Muslim conflict. In his own words, and I quote, Ambedkar in 1944 published the only serious work which would determine the outcome of the struggle for independence. Pakistan or partition of India, whose references range from Renan to Acton to Carton, from Canada, Ireland to Switzerland, stand a devastating indictment of intellectual poverty of Congress and its leaders. Critical of Muslim introversion, alert to Sarvakar's Hindutva, contemptuous of myth of pan-religious amity, Ambedkar did not, and I underline again, Ambedkar did not advocate separation of the two communities, but he proposed referenda to determine popular wishes, and in the event that Muslims insisted on it, sketched the boundaries of the two nations as well. So this was the foresightedness which has been highlighted by a foreign historian. Why at all Indian historians, starting from Bipin Chandra to others, they have not taken note of Babasaheb Ambedkar's intellectual contribution which he made in written books. This was a book-length volume on partition of India, but yet there is no reference even in the history text, and therefore I call it as mainstream blackout of Babasaheb Ambedkar. Now let us now understand very briefly about the different shades, epistemology, and perspectives involved in the production of thought of Babasaheb Ambedkar, to prove the point that how his larger ideas, larger views have not been incarnated. I'm just rushing briefly just to give you a canvas, because there are students who might be interested, so I may be a little bit pedagogical so that actually I can put my point. Now, if we really understand, read Babasaheb Ambedkar's volumes, now there are at least 21 volumes of Babasaheb Ambedkar writing and speeches, and I'm not talking about interpretation, I'm talking about only Babasaheb Ambedkar's writing and speeches. If we look at these, I find 10 shades of social thought, of 10 shades of thoughts of Babasaheb Ambedkar, starting from social, political, economic, religious, gender, educational, legal, developmental, and of course, thought for marginalized communities. Now, this is the suggestive list. You can definitely do more research and evolve from his writing and speeches what other vantage point you have. But as a social scientist with the limited acumen, I could only look these thoughts, and I have written extensively on this, but I'm just quoting for our listeners. The epistemology of Babasaheb Ambedkar's thought. Babasaheb was, of course, against the speculative philosophy. He did not produce the literature only on the basis of speculative philosophy. Rather, he had empirical data. And when we read, there are at least 8 sources through which he has tried to accumulate his knowledge. These sources are archaeological sources, second, Indological sources, governmental reports and documents, reports of the British committees and commissions, then newspaper clippings starting from Times of India, 1930s, 20s, 30s, he has referred, and of course books and journals. He had his own library, and you see his references as somebody has just referred, Anderson from Renan to Acton to Carton. Direct observation. Babasaheb Ambedkar did not only bring his experiential reality, rather he also went to look into the atrocities and exclusion of his people. Last but not the least, his people's perception. How people's view the problem, and therefore he incorporated those elements when he used to have his own hustings, his own meetings, his own social meetings. He had this. Now, having given you this epistemological basis of his knowledge, let me see the perspective and approaches in Babasaheb Ambedkar's writing and speeches. At least 4 approaches I have, have tried to discover. One is, of course, Babasaheb Ambedkar has a civilizational approach. Second, he has historical understanding of institutions, and therefore there's a historical approach involved in this. Corollary to this is he also has evolutionary approach in his understanding. And last but not the least, he had comparative perspective as well. Just to quote the last point, that the comparative perspective. Just to give you this example, that how he really used this comparative perspective, specifically when he was trying the idea of which religion to go. And really, he tried to compare world religions. World religions not only through the religious texts, but he read, as you just suggesting, that he had 6 papers of sociology. He read Durkheim, he read Weber, and also he had Max Muller. Now, not only that, he quotes extensively from science of religion at that time, and therefore he compares the religions of the world and then tries to decide. Not only that, the second example comes when he tries to understand India's untouchability. He looks into slavery. He looks into Roman slavery and then goes on to look into American slavery and then try to have a comparative picture. Of course, the constitution is writ large. He looks at different constitutions. At least he quotes 7 types of constitutions. He has looked from Ireland, American, Canadian, Australian, South African, and at that time there was some other very, very seminal constitutional work which had come. Having discussed this perspective of lectures, process of reductionism, blackout, larger ideas of thought, we have seen the 4 other bases through which that reductionism has been taken place. Now let us turn to this important aspect of idea of modernity and nation building. Now, modernization, if you see as a process, modernization as a process in India, specifically in India, according to sociologists, modernization for both Hindus and Islamic tradition implies a psychic normative challenge. A psychic normative challenge to break away from hierarchy to equality, from holism to individualism, from transcendence to this worldly rational and secularism. This is what is modernity. Now, such construction, according to Professor T.K. Uman, a sociologist, tries to argue that this creates a dichotomy between tradition and modernity. This means tradition and modernity are 2 systems based on different types of principles and institutions. For instance, according to Louis Dumont, traditional system is based on 4 unique values, that is holism, hierarchy, continuity, and otherworldliness. And modernity is based on individualism, egalitarianism, historicity, and this worldliness. Now, seen in this light of modernity and tradition, Ambedkar wanted, what did Ambedkar wanted in the traditional Hindu social order? And according to Ambedkar, Ambedkar wanted a social order based on individualism, equality, liberty, and fraternity. In his own words, and I quote, everyone, every man should have a philosophy of his life, for everyone must have a standard to measure his conduct, and philosophy is nothing but a standard to measure positively. My philosophy be said to be enshrined in three words: equality, liberty, and fraternity. Not only that, along with this, three cardinal principles of equality, liberty, and fraternity, Ambedkar, in other place, in his seminal essay on unique and essential features of Hindu social order, tried to argue that there is no place for individual in the Hindu social order. According to him, and I quote, the Hindu social order does not recognize the individual as a center of social purpose. The unit of Hindu society is not the individual Brahmin or individual Kshatriya. In the Hindu social order, there is no room for individual merit and no consideration for individual justice, unquote. Therefore, Ambedkar argued if one wants to establish a free social order, then the first principle should be, quote, that the individual should be an end himself, and that the aim of society, aim and object of society is the growth of the individual and the development of his personality. Further, unquote, Ambedkar also argued society is not above the individual, and if the individual has to subordinate himself to society, it is because such subordination is for his betterment and only to the extent necessary. So Ambedkar was quite clear that the individual should be at the center and equality, liberty, and fraternity should be established. If individualism, equality, liberty, and fraternity are the principles on the basis of which Ambedkar wanted to establish his modernity, then the moot question is, what is the source and the values of these? What is the source? What is the epistemic basis for Ambedkar? Let me quote again. Let no one, however, say that I have borrowed my philosophy from French Revolution. I have not. My philosophy has roots from religion and not in political science. I have derived these from my master, the Buddha. So, in Buddhism, if the Buddhism is the source of his modern system, then what is so unique, according to Ambedkar, about this philosophy, this whole philosophy of modernity? And Ambedkar says, and I quote again, in Buddha's philosophy, liberty and equality had a place, but he added that unlimited liberty destroys equality, and absolute equality left no room for liberty. In his philosophy, in his philosophy only, he talks about that fraternity acquires a higher position. Fraternity acquires, and only fraternity can guarantee liberty and equality. Even law had a place only as a safeguard against breaches of liberty and equality. But he said, and he argued that he did not believe that law can be a guarantee for the breaches of liberty and equality. And therefore, it is important that we had to know that how fraternity is so important. And therefore, Ambedkar, in his idea, gave highest place to fraternity. Now, having this actually the cardinal principle of modernity, with the source of modernity, we have to also look into how this modernity will be achieved. And for this, Ambedkar had also written a piece where he compared Buddha with Karl Marx. And it is here, Buddha with Karl Marx, that he argued that how Buddhist ideology or Buddhist idea is a modern idea which has really created revolution and has made a modernity possible. Now, comparing the two, Ambedkar argued that can we really compare the two? And then argue that really there can be a process of revolution which will create a modernity. So Ambedkar could get that what is the similarity between the two? Because they are historically two apart personalities, at least 2,500 years gap is there, and yet there is a possibility of comparison. Ambedkar said yes, there are four at least important similarities. There are four important similarities between Marx and Buddha. One, the function of philosophy is to reconstruct the world and not to waste its time in explaining the origin of the world. So reconstruction is an important aspect of philosophy which is equal in Marx as well as in Ambedkar. The second aspect is that there is a conflict of interest between class and class. So class interest is there. The third aspect is that private property is basically, responsible for the exploitation, and it brings sorrow to the masses. So third element. And fourth, it is necessary for the good of the society that the sorrows be removed by the abolition of private property. So both of them agree. But where did they differ? Ambedkar tried to argue. What is the difference between Marx? So Marx talks about, or Marxist talks about that yes, history making project can be achieved through violence, one, and two, through dictatorship of proletariat. But it is here that Ambedkar talked about that Buddha is not talking about a proletariat revolution. Buddha is also not talking about violence. Buddha is talking about a voluntary change of moral imposition of individual revolution or individualist revolution. There has to be a moral change within this, and therefore he gives three very important paths to achieve that. One is, of course, that you have to have 5 vows, that is Panchshila, that starting from not hurting to even the plant or ecology or the human beings, to actually not even stealing, taking liquor, entering into licentious activities and so on and so forth. So these 5 shilas have to be practiced by the individual. But not only this, there is also 8-fold path that has to be also brought in, and starting from right speech to right occupation and even right exercise, the physical exercises, vyayam, is also required. So this 8-fold path, and along with that there are, you have to achieve nibbana. That means that there are 10 hurdles before you really achieve it. Now I am arguing this case because I am a votary of multiple modernities. I don't believe that there is only a source of Western modernity and there are no sources of other modernities. If the cardinal principle values are there, then actually there may be multiple sources of modernity, and even our social scientists from Durkheim, Weber and Marx have talked about only different shades of modernity. Even first world modernity, second world modernity, and quote unquote the third world modernity, they all have different sources. They have different sources. If you see, the first world modernity came out of industrial revolution, the second world modernity came out of ideological revolution, and the third world modernity has come out of revolution against colonialism. Now, if they have different sources of modernity, then actually what we have to look into that were there really different sources of modernity which existed before the scientific revolution also. So I just want to drag the time a little bit further, not to restricting only to 15th century, since when the project of modernity starts. I want to say that if you really want to search these values were present in the history as well, and we have to look into those alternative sources of modernity. If there are multiple traditions, how can there be a modernity? There have to be multiple modernities also. After all, people are not passive recipient. They're not recipient at all. And therefore, I think there is a case for understanding a different source of modernity through Ambedkar when he compares Buddha with Karl Marx. Now, this brings me to his project of nation building. The last point is that Ambedkar was few of the leaders of his time who talked about that India was not a nation. And he quoted national poet Rabindranath Tagore. He said, and he quotes, and I quote him, even national poet of Bengal doesn't think that India is a nation. India is nation in the making. And this he has said throughout from 1927 onwards. You can read it. Ambedkar was trying to argue that we are not a nation. We are nation in the making. And he quotes Rabindranath Tagore, he talks Anglo-Indians and many people. And he said, let me quote for you. Speaking on 26th November 1949 in the Constituent Assembly, when the final copy of the Constitution was supposed to be handed over, Ambedkar argued in the assembly, and I quote, politically minded Indian resented the expression, the people of India. They preferred the expression, the Indian nation. I am of the opinion that in believing that we are a nation, we are cherishing a great delusion. As late as 1955, when the movement for the separate linguistic state was going on, Ambedkar opined, and I quote again, the nature of Union of Indian expresses only an idea. It is not indicative of an achievement. We have to go a long way to become a United States of India. The Union of India is far, far away from the United States of India. This is Ambedkar in 1955. So, why Ambedkar thinks that India is not a nation at that time? And he argues that how can a nation be divided in several thousand castes be a nation? As we, in his own opinion, the castes are antinational. In the first place, because they bring about separation in the social life. They are antinational also because they generate jealousy and antipathy between caste and caste, unquote. Arguing further, he highlighted the fact that there is an utter lack among the Hindus what the sociologists call as consciousness of kind. And therefore, there is no consciousness of kind in every Hindu. If there is a consciousness, that consciousness is of caste. And therefore, Hindus cannot make or set to form a society or a nation. Therefore, he suggested we should overcome all of these difficulties if we really want to become a nation. Now, if that is the case, Ambedkar argued that if the people are divided into caste and caste, what about Hindus and Muslims during that period? How did Hindus and Muslims exist? Ambedkar also analyzed the relationship between Hindus and Muslims by asking the question, are there enough affinities between Hindus and Muslims to continue as a nation, he cautioned, are there any common historical antecedents which Hindus and Muslims can be said to share together as a matter of pride and as a matter of sorrow? That is the question which the Hindus must answer. And he argued that as far as icons are concerned, Hindus revere Prithviraj Chauhan, Rana Pratap and Shivaji in history, and Muslims revere likes of Muhammad bin Qasim, Aurangzeb. In religious faith, the Hindus draw inspiration from Ramayana, Mahabharata and Gita. The Muslims derive inspiration from Quran and Hadith, and therefore common features and shared history is lacking. And therefore, he said that we have to understand what exactly is a nation. It is not conglomeration of people only. And he quotes Ernest Renan. Ernest Renan defined nation as a living soul, a spiritual principle. Two things which in truth are but one constitute the soul. This is spiritual principle. One is the past, the other is the present. One is the common possession of rich heritage of memories, and the other is actual consent, the desire to live together, the will to preserve worthily the undivided inheritance which has been handed over to them. The nation is like the individual. It is the outcome of long past of efforts, the sacrifices, devotion, a heroic past, great men, glory. These are the social capital upon which nations are built. And therefore, Ambedkar was very, very clear that the commonality, the suffering in common doesn't exist, because he thinks that suffering in common is a greater bond of union of joy than joy. As regards to national memories, moorings are worth more than triumph. And therefore, if really India wants to be a nation, then they have to come together, they have to forget their past, and they have to forget their own icons. They have to create a common heritage. Now, if Ambedkar had given this idea, so how then a nation has to be built? Now, it is here that Ambedkar was very much for establishing the rights of the erstwhile deprived communities, especially the scheduled castes, the scheduled tribes, the minorities, as well as women. So these four categories Ambedkar identified that they have to be given self-representation. Without self-representation, there cannot be a process of nation building. Now, I will just take one example to prove the point that why exactly he was trying to argue about the self-representation, and I take the example of Dalits, the scheduled caste, the ex-untouchables, that why he was asking self-representation for them. Ambedkar argued that there are three very important reasons for self-representation, and he quoted John Stuart Mills, who had argued that a good government is not that only gives the representation to the aspirations of the people. A good government is that which gives self-representation also. So only the representation of aspiration will not qualify to make a government a good government. There has to be self-representation also. Why? Because government is a very, very important space to harness your capabilities and capacities. Second, Ambedkar said that if you really want to have a democratic society, then the rulers should give up their rights, and the rule should also get the right to frame the laws. It is not always that the rulers will keep on making law for the rule. If that is the case, then there will not be democracy. So the rulers should also know that what is the pain of getting ruled. So it is not only one-sided that rulers will make rules, and ruled will always be having the rules. So this will only, make one group as the rulers, and others will always remain ruled. But this situation should change, and therefore you need self-representation. Last but not the least, Ambedkar said that self-representation is also a moral question. And he quoted Gopal Krishna Gokhale. Gopal Krishna Gokhale had given a representation. Gopal Krishna Gokhale, one of the towering leaders of India's freedom struggle, had given a representation to British bureaucracy for asking that the British bureaucracy is not giving representation to Indians in the British bureaucracy. I'm talking about a time of 1885 when the Public Services Commission of India had come, and Indians were asking for their representation in the British bureaucracy. So the memorandum says that the British is not giving representation to Indians, and therefore dwarfing and stunting of Indian is taking place. The Indians are not able to achieve their total manhood. They are not able to harness their capability and capacities. Ambedkar draw a straight line and argue that, okay, the British have come only 150 years back. And within 150 years, your capacities and capabilities, you are losing all that. Your dwarfing and stunting is taking place. What about Dalits? You have not given them the rights to govern themselves for thousands of years. What about their capacities and capabilities? And therefore, he said that there is a moral question of self-representation of the Dalits. Not only moral question of self-representation of the Dalits, he talked about self-representation of the minorities, where he tried to establish the religious rights of the minorities in the Constitution Assembly, and of course the rights for the women in the Indian Constitution with the Hindu Code Bill, where he tried to argue that for women specifically, that Hindu marriage will not be a sacrament. It should be a contract, and therefore the Hindu Marriage Act 1955 changed the Hindu Marriage Act as a contract rather than a sacrament. The second was, of course, he allowed, or he made law for the civil marriages in which intercaste marriages and interreligious marriages were to be accepted. The third was right to property for women in the property of husband, and also right to property to daughter in the property of father. Anti-Dowry Act was another law which he passed, and last but not the least, the consent of wife in adoption. That earlier actually in India, in adoption of the kid, the consent of wife was not required, but after the Hindu Code Bill, the consent of wife was also taken into consideration. Now, these are few, I'm just giving you examples that he tried to establish for the process of nation building, in which erstwhile excluded communities were supposed to be given self-representation. Last point in the nation building process, he was trying to argue that yes, four very important steps which have to be adhered if we really want to keep our unity and integrity alive. And these are four, and I'll stop. The self-introspection by the Indians. The self-introspection by the Indians that yes, whether the Jaichans are within the Indian society. I'm using a metaphor. Jaichan was, a person who had invited Muhammad Ghori to invade India, and after that, the story. But Ambedkar argued that we have to. It is not that India has lost its freedom once. It can lose. It can lose another time, and therefore we have to self-introspect if you really want to keep our unity and integrity alive. The second aspect, Brother Ambedkar said that adherence to the constitutional means. Ambedkar said that if you really want to maintain your democracy, you should maintain, and I quote, if we wish to maintain democracy, not merely in form, but also in fact, we must adhere to the constitutional method for achieving our social and economic objectives. The third is that denunciation of hero worship. And Ambedkar was very categorical. Ambedkar argued that nothing is wrong in being grateful to great men who have really rendered lifelong services to the country, but there is a limit. There's a limit of gratefulness, as has well been argued by Irish patriot Daniel O'Connell, and I quote, "No man can be grateful at the cost of his honor. No woman can be grateful at the cost of his chastity, and no nation can be grateful at the cost of its liberty. The caution is far more necessary in the case of India, because in India, bhakti, reverence, is also a path of devotion which is very much there, and therefore hero worship can be translated into politics also. So bhakti in religion is all right. It can be road to salvation, but bhakti in politics is a sure road to degradation and eventual dictatorship, and therefore he denounced hero worship. Last but not least, Ambedkar was also trying to argue that we should not remain to the level of political democracy only. We have to transcend and translate political democracy into social and economic democracy also, if we really want to strengthen our country and lead a process of nation building. Thank you.